High above the Ambon, Saram sector in July 1944, the tropical haze could not hide the focus on the civilian's face as he scanned the instrument panel through the polarized canopy of his P-38 Lightning. A squadron leader from the 475th Fighter Group studied the tall man flying off his wing, noting the unusual name on the roster, Charles A. Lindbergh, Technical Observer. To combat veterans accustomed to replacements from stateside schools, this civilian consultant seemed almost theatrical. 12 years earlier, he had crossed the Atlantic alone. Now he was back in a fighter cockpit, flying over Japanese-held territory. What none of the pilots escorting him realized was that they were witnessing the validation of a range revolution that would redraw the map of Pacific air warfare. Within 6 weeks, the techniques this civilian proved would transform the P-38 Lightning from a short-legged escort to an aircraft of strategic reach. His logbook would record a 30% fuel efficiency improvement and a combat radius increase from 570 to over 750 miles. It was a story of empirical testing defying institutional doctrine, of data overthrowing dogma in the crucible of war. The P-38 Lightning had emerged from a 1937 pre-war specification calling for a high-altitude interceptor. When Japan overran the Southwest Pacific in 1942 and 1943, General George Kenny of the 5th Air Force demanded fighters capable of escorting B-24 Liberators to WWII, and eventually the Philippines. The distances seemed impossible. Twin-engine P-38s, with their long wings and turbo-supercharged Allison engines, appeared the answer, yet the Lightning could barely reach 570 miles in combat configuration. Lockheed engineers had promised the aircraft would be magnificent if flown by the book. But the book came from Training Command, and its iron rule was absolute. Never run manifold pressure higher than RPM divided by 100. The never over square doctrine became gospel. According to the manuals, over square operation, high manifold pressure with low RPM, would destroy pistons, melt bearings, and ruin engines. Pilots obeyed it religiously. At 2,300 RPM and 30 inches of manifold pressure, the aircraft burned fuel voraciously but remained within safety margins. In tropical conditions, fuel exhaustion and forced landings became routine hazards. By early 1944, the 475th Fighter Group, flying from Bayek, had lost aircraft not to enemy fire but to fuel starvation. Bombers flew to distant targets without proper escort coverage. Japanese interceptors exploited the gaps, and the Lightning's reputation for limited range hardened into doctrine. Major Thomas Maguire, one of the 5th Air Force's top aces, watched his pilots land with tanks dry, their formation stretched thin. Squadron engineers produced mimeographed cruise cards listing the approved settings: 2,300 RPM, 30 inches manifold pressure, mixture set to auto-rich. No deviation permitted. The logic was simple: protect the engines even at the cost of reach. Yet a few pilots noticed anomalies. Those who climbed too fast, forgot to reduce power, or pushed throttle settings beyond the rule reported something unexpected. The engines didn't fail. Cylinder head temperatures stayed normal. Oil temperatures remained in the green. And when they checked their fuel consumption afterward, it was lower. Captain Richard Bong, already an ace, mentioned it during a debrief. I ran 1,600 RPM and 40 inches for 20 minutes. No issues. Fuel burn was better. That single observation would become the cornerstone of a revolution. Technicians began inspecting engines flown over square. They found no damage. Spark plugs showed proper combustion. Bearings remained within tolerance, and borescope checks revealed no cylinder distress. The never-over-square rule, they realized, was not an engineering limit but a teaching simplification, a memory device from flight school. It had been designed to protect students from the opposite mistake, running too low manifold pressure with high RPM, which could cause poor cooling and fouling. Somehow, that simple mnemonic had metastasized into an absolute operational doctrine, chaining an entire theater's fighter range. When Charles Lindbergh arrived in New Guinea in May 1944 as a consultant from United Aircraft Corporation, his reputation preceded him. Pilots saw a famous civilian aviator dabbling in combat. But Lindbergh's objective was clear: to test engine management efficiency under combat conditions. He proposed comparative flights: same route, same altitude, same tank load, one element flying by the book, another using his economy cruise. 1,600 RPM, 38-42 inches of manifold pressure, mixture lean to peak exhaust temperature, then richened slightly. He meticulously recorded every reading: cylinder head temperature, oil temperature, and fuel flow. After the first flight, skeptics felt vindicated. The difference seemed minor, fuel savings of barely 10%. His numbers work on paper, one flight leader remarked, but this is combat, not a lecture hall. The turning point came weeks later, during a maximum range escort test to Halmahera. On 24 June 1944, a six-ship formation from the 433rd Possum Squadron departed Bayek, each carrying two 165-gallon drop tanks. Lindbergh flew element lead. At 23,000 feet, he stabilized his aircraft at 1,600 RPM and 40 inches of manifold pressure, mixture carefully leaned. The flight pressed on past the usual turnback point and kept going. Over the Saram Sea, the approved schedule dictated return to base. Yet Lindbergh's gauges still showed fuel reserves sufficient for another half-hour on station. By the time they returned, his tanks contained what official charts declared impossible. Maintenance confirmed it. A 750-mile combat radius achieved, with cylinder head temperatures peaking at 232 degrees C and oil at 85 degrees C, both well below limits. Fuel flow averaged 62 gallons per hour against the approved 82. The mechanics found no wear, no overheating, no anomaly. Colonel Charles MacDonald, commanding the 475th, studied the data. For the first time, an outsider's experiment had yielded empirical proof that doctrine, not the machine, was the limitation. MacDonald ordered squadron-level testing and training in the new technique. Pilots were briefed to treat temperature, not procedure, as their constraint. Manifold pressure and RPM became adjustable tools, not fixed commandments. As long as cylinder head and oil temperatures stayed within limits, the aircraft could cruise far leaner and longer. By early July, the Lightning's true potential was unlocked. Pilots began referring to the method simply as the Lindbergh technique. It spread quickly across the 5th Air Force. Later that month, the test met combat. Lindbergh flew again with the 433rd Fighter Squadron over Ambon, Saram, escorting B-24s at the theoretical limit of the old range chart. When Japanese fighters attacked, his element, configured for economy cruise, still carried fuel for engagement. He advanced the throttles, 60 inches, 3,000 RPM full combat power. The engines responded instantly. Lindbergh maneuvered, fired, and destroyed one enemy aircraft. The after-action report credited the kill to technical observer Charles A. Lindbergh. When the flight landed at Bayek, both engines passed inspection flawlessly. The myth had died over Ambon. Within days, every P-38 squadron in the 475th received updated cruise cards. 2 weeks later, adjacent groups requested copies. Maintenance logs documented a striking pattern. Range increased by up to 30%, with no rise in engine failure. For the 5th Air Force, it was a quiet revolution. A procedural correction had achieved what redesign and new production could not. The Lightning could now reach Balikpapan, Tarakan, and Davao, targets once marked beyond escort range. Operational planning maps were redrawn. Mission profiles that previously demanded mid-route refueling or unescorted bombers were now flown direct. The escort umbrella extended hundreds of miles farther across the Pacific. The metrics were astonishing. Combat radius increased from 570 to 750 miles. On-station time tripled from 15 minutes to nearly an hour. Fuel-related aborts dropped from 12% to under 5%. Bomber loss rates fell proportionally. Continuous escort coverage meant fewer unprotected approach phases, fewer B-24s lost to interceptors. A procedural insight had delivered a strategic effect. By August 1944, temperature-first cruise became standard doctrine. Pilots learned to climb moderately, stabilize at 1,600 RPM and 38-42 inches manifold pressure, and lean mixture by exhaust temperature. Cylinder head and oil temperatures became the only true limits. The new mindset demanded discipline. Every pilot had to monitor instruments and manage thermal balance. But the reward was transformative. From Biak, P-38s could now accompany bombers through the entire strike and back. Japanese intelligence, observing Lightning escorts over previously unreachable targets, concluded a new long-range variant had entered service. In truth, only the pilot's technique had changed. By late 1944, operational data confirmed the magnitude of the change. Across 15,000 sorties, engine failure rates remained unchanged. Yet mission success rates, escort duration, and bomber survivability rose dramatically. The 475th Fighter Group, operating under the new regime, became the Pacific's highest-scoring Lightning unit. 548 aerial victories, 94% escort integrity. The range problem of the P-38 was gone, erased by mathematics and observation. At 5th Air Force Headquarters, revised planning documents reflected the revolution. In March 1944, the Lightning had been listed as range limited, suitable for missions within 570 miles. By July, the same reports recorded a new baseline, 700-plus miles combat radius under revised cruise procedures. By September, the never-over-square rule was formally rescinded. Engine limits were now defined thermally, not procedurally. RPM and manifold pressure could be set for best efficiency within temperature bounds. The strategic implications were immense. Targets once considered out of reach now fell within daily operational planning. No new aircraft, no additional bases, just better understanding. Fighter escort missions now extended deep into the southern Philippines and Borneo. Japanese defenses, built on assumptions of limited American range, were forced to spread thin. Bombing accuracy improved as bombers no longer diverted to avoid unescorted sectors. From an engineering standpoint, the result was elegant. The same fuel, same airframe, same engines, but 30% more combat range. Knowledge had outperformed hardware. By the war's end, the economy cruise had become standard across the Pacific. It proved that doctrine could be deadlier than the enemy when left unchallenged. The transformation came not from technology, but from thinking differently about it. The 5th Air Force logged more than 15,000 sorties under revised procedures between July 1944 and VJ Day. Every mission returned measurable efficiency gains. The cumulative effect equated to months of additional aircraft production, achieved with no new material at all. In October 1945, at Wright Field, Ohio, a post-war technical conference gathered combat veterans and training officers. Among the sessions was one on engine management lessons from the Pacific. A training instructor from 1942 asked Colonel Charles MacDonald about the contradiction between training rules and combat results. MacDonald's answer was preserved in transcript. "We made a fundamental mistake in confusing simplicity with truth. The square rule kept students safe, but it became a cage. The real limits were always thermal and mechanical, not mathematical." He continued, "Don't exceed cylinder head temperature. Don't exceed oil temperature. Don't exceed maximum RPM or manifold pressure. Within those boundaries, choose whatever combination serves the mission." MacDonald concluded with words that define the legacy. "Lindbergh didn't bring us new engines or fuel. He brought a notebook and the discipline to question assumptions." The revolution he described was subtle yet profound. It transformed operational reach, strategic planning, and engineering understanding across the entire Pacific theater. Every sortie flown after July 1944 carried the invisible fingerprint of that quiet civilian observer. The P-38 Lightning, once dismissed as a short-range twin-engine fighter, became the embodiment of endurance, the aircraft that escorted bombers from New Guinea to the Philippines and back. And all because a man who once crossed the Atlantic alone had asked a simple question: what if the rule was wrong? The answer reshaped the war's final year. By teaching pilots to trust their instruments, not their manuals, Lindbergh extended American reach across an ocean. He turned mathematics into strategy, efficiency into range, and precision into power. From 22,000 feet over the Celebes Sea, the tropical haze shimmered. Somewhere in that blue distance, the myth of limitation burned away, replaced by the clarity of measured truth.